So it's been a while since I've hopped on here, but today I'm kicking off the first Doula Talk that we're going to have for 2020. So if you've been hanging out with me for a while, a couple years ago, I started Doula Talk, where myself and other birth professionals get to chat about really a lot of the things that we talk about behind closed doors, but that we don't ever approach the internet with openly together. So today we're going to be talking all about birth planning, and birth planning is one of those things that grinds my gears because there's just so much to say about how to make a birth plan, how to make it work for you, unmet expectations, what works, what doesn't. And so today I have a super special guest because she has a whole business surrounded around helping birthing people plan their births, but plan them in a way that makes sense and using tools and technology to plan them in a way that makes sense. So I'm gonna invite her on here. I'm so happy that you guys are joining me today, and we're gonna get this party started. Now, I have a whole list of my own kind of talking points. Hey!
Hey, it's so good to see you.
Look at your hair. I feel like,
Okay.
oh my goodness, you're giving me hair envy. I need to color my hair so bad. I feel so boring right now.
It was pink up until about a week ago, and then I decided to change. It's really funny. Ever since I colored it, I had some people come to the door and ask if my mom was home, and I was like, I have a 14-year-old daughter. Like,
Well, that's a good compliment, though.
I know.
Like, you feel really good.
Totally.
Awesome. So I want you to just kind of take a second and tell us who you are, introduce yourself. I really want you to tell us where you are located, and then you can kind of give us the backstory on like how you got into birth work, what you're currently doing like in the community and all that jazz.
Yeah, sure. My name's Amy Hatter, and I am a birth doula in the Denver area. I've been a doula for over 11 years, and I really do love it. I love supporting families. It's very meditative for me. And I've had a lot of fun with it. I also am an artist. So I have done all of the birth illustrations that are on Motherboard, along with a lot of earthy, birthy kind of goddess artwork on mandalajourney.com. I am a mama to 6 kids, 3 of which I gave birth to. Yeah, we Brady Bunch. So we have 2 9-year-olds, 2 11-year-olds, and 2 14-year-olds. Wow. So it's a lot, but it's a lot of fun too. I became a doula after my second daughter was born. My first was in a hospital with an OB and an epidural, and a very, pretty standard, straightforward hospital experience, but I just really wanted a different path for my second baby. So I went to a freestanding birth center, had my baby in the water with midwives, and really, really loved that, and was like, I could either be pregnant forever or more responsibly just support other people and having supported physiologic, just encouraging them to understand what options are out there for them and really make educated decisions. So I became a doula when my second daughter was a few months old. And now she's turning 12 in June. So that's about the timing. Yeah. And I loved it and, really enjoyed supporting families. And then about 6 years ago, a family hired me. The dad was a graphic designer, and he does user experience and user interface for technology. And he made this really cool graphics-based birth plan that has icons and stuff. And I was like, this is wild. This is really cool. I've never seen anything like this. This was a really long time ago. And I posted it on my art page, and it went totally viral. And Penny Simkin was like messaging me asking to use it in her childbirth classes. I was like, wow, this is really cool. Yeah, I think we're onto something. And he's like, yeah, sure, send them to me and I'll make them one. I was like, no, I think like big picture. Like there's a lot of birth plan checklists out there, but a lot of parents don't understand anything about, when you're like, hey, what do you want to do for fetal monitoring? Like they don't know what that is. They don't know what they're looking for. All of these things are tools. And so, there's a lot of nuance when it comes to using these tools appropriately. And even that can change from family to family. Like everybody's perception of safety and risk can be so different. And so really meeting parents where they're at and helping them think through what their core values are around birth and what their situation is like. And, it looks different for every family. So helping them really make sense of that. So neither Andy or we're technical co-founders. And so we started building it 6 years ago. It was really hard to find somebody to actually build the technology, the platform.
Mm-hmm.
I had all the content finished. It's really funny. I was talking to a hospital recently and they're like, your content team did a great job. It's like, thank you.
I'll let them
know next time I see them. But yeah, so we did all the content and then we were just looking for somebody to build it. We finally connected with Firepoint Studios in March of 2018. And so they're a development studio and they built the platform and have supported us through, they're like my technology doulas because I'm like, I don't know what that means. And now it's really funny because people will come to me thinking I can fix their computer. And I was like, oh no, like I don't do that.
Because motherboard has a very like I had assumed that like, okay, this is a doula who was like already kind of techie, so she just like used her tech stuff to create this, because motherboard, like the aesthetic of it and like just the way you guys present it, it's very fresh. And I think in the birth world we have a lot of stuff that's very not fresh. It's like kind of like stuck in time a little bit, a little just kind of like you got the drawings and like the illustrations and like that's pretty much it. I remember the first time I saw your illustration that like was a graphic that moved and I was like, whoa, like finally, like this feels like 2020, it doesn't feel like something out of a textbook that someone screenshotted and like cropped and put it on Instagram.
Well, and I can't stand, first of all, I'll be a little snotty as an artist, but there's so many ugly drawings and bad drawings, and also I don't understand why they're all bald white babies. And so I tried to have diversity in my illustrations, so we have little babies of color in there too. And I also really wanted to make them look alive. Like a lot of these illustrations are all like tuck and roll kind of thing. And they don't look like they're navigating a pelvis. They don't look like they look like bowling balls. And I'm like, I really want to show illustrations that look dynamic. I'm still working on a bunch of illustrations that show like physiologic birth, and it's going to be upright too. So hands and knees is where I'm going to start. But it's such a challenge. It's like the most complicated puzzle that you could ever put together. Cause I'm like, okay, so that comes down. But then where the hell does this go?
Right.
So I've been, talking to like Gail Tully and some other pelvic floor therapists and stuff that are like, okay, so, and it also looks different for every person. Everybody's anatomy is a little different. So trying to find something that is beautiful and easy to understand. I'm still working on some of those illustrations, but it's kind of how I appease my dad when he's like, well, what are you going to do with your art degree? I'm like, I don't know, be the CEO of a tech company, I guess.
That definitely works. So I want to circle back to motherboard, but I want to get into, because you spend so much time in like the birth planning world, what is the mistake that you feel like moms make when they are making their birth plans? Because obviously as a doula, I talk to a lot of moms who are birth planning, and there's kind of like these like kind of milestones that people go through. And the first milestone is like, okay, I'm pregnant, I got to make a birth plan. And, I got to pick my provider and then make my birth plan, and then that's kind of it. And so there's this huge emphasis on the birth plan right now in our culture. And what do you think moms are kind of making a mistake when it comes to the birth plan?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think when you look at birth plans, there's two main parts of it. The first part of it is just it can be a really great framework for you to kind of checklist education and ways to inform yourself about different tools.
Mm-hmm.
So the first part is really, it starts with you. So it's really like that introspective, like, let me figure out what's important to me and educate myself about these different things. And then the second part is that it's a communication tool. And so the second part is where it gets a little tricky because a lot of care providers hate birth plans, especially when they're getting a 6-page birth plan that's really rigid or it contradicts itself. You know, like you might have options on there that just don't go together, and that, you know, you're kind of piecing together off things off the internet and they might contradict each other. And so to be a communication tool, you really need to have something that is easy to understand for your care providers. And
Right.
so, you know, you have to, I mean, especially if you're birthing in the hospital, you know, that there's just the reality that they're probably going to be managing a lot of patients. They're going to be, you know, only have so much amount of time. And so, you know, we really have to make a tool that they can access easily. So the way Motherboard handles this is, you know, we have lots and lots of topics. You can go through as many topics as you want. Every time you select an option, there's a little green check mark that checks off saying like, hey, you've educated yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we're building the communication tool, it's really important to kind of refine it. And I think that's the mistake that a lot of parents make, is like, you know, they have a laundry list of, here are the 45 things that I absolutely need to have happen or not happen during my birth. And that can be really overwhelming, and a lot of things can get lost in the shuffle, and it just might not be as effective of a communication tool. So you can choose on Motherboard, you can choose as many options as you would like on Motherboard, but then when you're building your board, you select your 15 most important. So you get like 5 for labor, 5 for birth, 5 for postpartum, and then the newborn medications.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a way of being like, okay, I realize that this is such an unpredictable process, but if we can preserve these 15 things, I'm gonna feel really supported. I'm gonna feel really cared for.
Yeah.
You know, like it's a very important and mindful paring down of what's important to you. And then also, you know, I have some families that are like, but I want my care provider to know all these things, and they definitely can. So we have an interactive portion on the app. And it's a web-based application, so don't look for it in the App Store. But we have a team area. So when you invite your care provider, your doula, your mother-in-law, to your partner to your team, they can see not only your 15 that you've selected as your most important,
Oh,
but
okay.
they can also expand those topics and see everything that you've selected in real time. So maybe a situation changes. Maybe you develop cholestasis, and you know you're probably looking at an induction. So maybe you prioritize your preferences for an induction, and everybody that's signed in as a team member can see that in real time. It's also
Okay.
great for doulas because, you know, if you are rolling out of bed at 2 a.m. and you're like, oh my gosh, were they banking their cord blood? I can't remember. You can just pull up their Motherboard and you can see all of their most recent updates.
Okay, that's awesome, because I'm definitely like, of course, when you get that 2 a.m. call and you show up at the hospital and you're still a little like,
Mm-hmm.
out of it,
Yeah.
you definitely are going through those things like, okay, is this the client that's saving her placenta? And you don't
Yeah.
want to be
Yeah.
like, you're doing that and you're doing, right? Just like, no,
Right.
you're supposed to
Totally.
know, I'm the doula.
Totally.
But, at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're still kind of like, have to get your wits about yourself. So
Yeah.
I
Well,
really
and it's
like
really
that.
helpful. It's really helpful too, because they can also invite your backup. So one of the things that I get really, I don't know, it's just so repetitive in my own practice, is when I'm sending that email updating my backup of like, okay, this is who they are and this is where they're birthing or whatever. And this
Mhm.
is a way, like if they invite the backup can also see other options if they end up going to the birth.
Yeah.
So that can be a great communication tool between you and your backup too.
Yeah, that's awesome. And one of the other things that I see a lot with births now is that people are inviting their family to birth,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
they don't really know the birth plan, and so they're like almost working against each other.
Yeah.
And that Like I try to tell my clients that if you're gonna invite someone to your birth, then you really strongly need to consider how much they understand about birth and how much they understand about the birth that you want. Because when your mom sees you in pain, you know, she's gonna tell you to get the epidural. And
I know.
when your best friend is like sitting there and you're in active labor and you keep moaning and groaning and they're like, oh, the baby's coming, like the baby's coming, and they're standing there with their phone, and I'm just kind of like, we've got time, like if you could I mean, this type of tool, it sounds like it would be perfect for people who want to invite their families, but their family just needs to learn a little bit more, because that can really make a birth go in not a great direction when people are just kind of like clueless.
And I always say, well, I always tell my clients that your birth is not a place to prove anything to anybody. You know, I've had some clients that are like, well, I want to invite my mom. My mom is so against me having this baby at a birth center, but I want to invite her just to show her that I can. And I was like, ooh, that's real challenging energy to invite into your birth space, because then you're not sinking into it. You have something to prove. And you know, if they're not on board, they shouldn't be at your birth, because you are going to absorb all of that negativity. And it goes the same thing for care providers. I think that's probably another consideration that I would say for families building birth plans. Because a lot of people, I think they wait until, you know, the 9th hour, like they're in their 3rd trimester. They're like, oh, right, I need to actually figure out what I'm doing. But I think it's so good to think about these things as early as possible, so that you can show your birth plan or your motherboard to your care provider and just really get a sense of their reaction to it, and their reaction to the things that you're talking about, or the things that are important to you. Because if you're getting a lot of red flags with that communication, it's so much less stressful to switch in your 1st or 2nd trimester than it is like at 37 weeks, when you're kind of staring down the barrel of a, you know, maybe an elective induction that they're pushing on you or something. So think about things early is what I would say, for sure.
Yeah, and that's such a good piece of advice, because I think people get to the end and changing providers is it's such a big thing. Like in the beginning, it doesn't seem like it'll be a big deal. Like, I'll just go somewhere else, right? But then you're like there with the big belly and the swollen ankles, and you're like, oh, like picking another provider, like right now, calling around, going to setting an appointment, doing all that. That's really good, because I think when people make the birth plan, like I always tell my clients, the birth plan is there to teach you. Like, that's the main thing that your birth plan is going to do for you. It's not going to protect you. It's not going to make everything magically manifest. It's really going to teach you. And I think when you get up to the end of that pregnancy, it's a lot to learn. Like, even when you pull up these birth plans on the internet and you just look at the sheer amount of things, like, it's so much to know. Okay, what is this? What is that intervention? Like, you know, and it's important to know.
And that's the big thing that I was you know, wanting to build with Motherboard, is that there's, like I said, there's lots of checklists out there, but a lot of people don't understand, you know, what the thing is and when it's used. And so our topics, like with every icon and option that you select, there is kind of like a little caption, like in a nutshell, if you just need the bare bones, like here's what the thing is and when it's used. And then there's a dig deeper where it's kind of like, okay, so this is what the research says, and this is when it's used, and this is when it's used appropriately. And then every topic has benefits and risks, and every topic has sample questions for your care provider. So we're really wanting this to be a springboard for a conversation between you and your birth team of, like, you know, I always thought, like, say, like, don't just ask if they have telemetry units on the floor. Ask if they're charged and how often they're being used, because I've totally been at births where they're like, oh, we don't have them. And then I'm like, oh, so Those over there, those aren't telemetry units. So just making sure, you know, that people know how to do intermittent monitoring, or how often that's used. So those questions can be really, really important to bring into your prenatal visit.
Yeah, that is so huge, because again, like, you go to the appointment and the doctor or the nurse is like, yeah, we do X, Y, and Z, or we have here in Maryland, the big thing is whether or not people have birthing tubs. There's been like so many occasions where someone is told that there's a birthing tub, and then they show up and it's like, actually, the tubs are used, there's only two tubs, the tub is broken, one's out of order. And you know, making the distinction between just writing down on your birth plan, I'm gonna have a water birth, versus like, okay, I'm gonna have water birth, and now I know I need to ask these questions to my provider, like, what are the stipulations, what are the rules, how many, you know, tubs are there, and stuff like that. So that is you're just selling me. I'm just gonna go on Motherboard's website after this.
Yeah. We've got a ton of great content, and it's important to keep it evidence-based and current. So we have two DMPs, two doctorates of midwifery, that are in the process of re-reviewing the content, just to give it credibility. I don't want to say I'm like just a doula, but like my pie in the sky big goal is to have this integrated into the hospitals, to really standardize that informed choice, and you know, give everybody the same information. And so to do that, we really need the credibility of having it be evidence-based, as much as possible. I mean, evidence is flawed too, but and just really have it be easy to digest. Like, I try to have our content, you know, just be that kind of nugget, like the core things that you need to make that decision. You know, we're not evidence-based birth. They are so great at really digging into the research. And, you know, if people want to read a 12-page paper on vitamin K, like, they are awesome at really the deep dive, and we want to be the starting place, and then we refer out for some of the deep dive stuff. And I also want to say we use all inclusive language. So we are, you know, we have a lot of different types of families that are represented. We use gender inclusive language. We also have a topic on like trans and non-binary folks. Like, if they want to call their genitalia a different thing, they can put that on their motherboard. We also have like chest feeding in the feeding your baby section. And I mean, some people are like, well, but you're called motherboard, which I totally get, but we consulted with some, you know, trans folks in that community, and we put the M in brackets, so it's also otherboard. Which, funny story, this is hilarious. You should always like search your name before you. Okay, I was on Google Console for the search, like where we're popping up in search, and apparently otherboard is an escort service in Colorado.
Oh, actually, where you are.
Yeah. So I was like, why are we getting all this hits for this? And I was like, oh, and it's like, you know, stings on this like escort service. So that's a little funny tidbit.
That's so interesting. And I'm glad you brought that up, because a week ago, or maybe over a week ago, I had made a post kind of to start a conversation about this language of birth. And I know it's kind of polarized in the birth community. It's either people are like, yes, I definitely support using inclusive language, and I want everyone to be heard and seen and felt and safe. And then the other side of it is kind of like, no, like, I'm a woman, and I feel like you're taking my womanness away from me by continuously kind of just like making, I guess, making these terms that are so broad and not really based on gender. And, you know, I don't really have a specific question for you, but just kind of to talk about this in a little bit more depth, because for one, you are called motherboard, and like you said, you guys consulted with people, and obviously you felt comfortable moving forward with mother. But I personally have had experiences where I use the word mother, or I use the word, particularly womb. Womb is the one that is very controversial for some reason, and I'm not quite sure. I haven't really pinpointed why it is that way, but womb and mother have seemed to be kind of trigger words on my page for people who feel like that does not it's not inclusive. And so I posed the question, so I guess I'll pose this question to you that I had on my page. Do you feel like we can use the word mom, mama, mother, in a way that is more so addressing the energy of what it means to be a mom, and do that without addressing someone's gender?
Yeah, it is definitely a hot topic right now, for sure. I know for me personally, how somebody defines themselves and their family, I don't ever feel like it takes anything away from my womanhood. Like, I'm a woman and I'm a mother, and I like somebody defining themselves a different way. It just doesn't take anything away from me. And that's just how I feel. It's really interesting about, what your question about terms. There was a little study that my friend Heather Thompson did for Elephant Circle, where she just sort of just started using gender inclusive terms in her childbirth class, which was predominantly, it was white, cis, straight families that were birthing at a birth center. And she just didn't really tell them. She just started changing her language. And the thing that I found really interesting was that a lot of the moms didn't even notice. But do you know who noticed? Was the dads, because they actually told her later that they felt like they were more included, that sometimes these birthing spaces were like womb energy, and if that's where you derive your power. Like, I mean, I am totally all about my womb and stuff like that, but they felt like they were a little bit more included, these heterosexual cisgender dads, when it wasn't so womb female focused, which I thought was really interesting. And yeah, I just think that you can still, like, I still do use mama and mother and everything when I know how somebody identifies. So there's this delineation between my business and when I'm in the birth space, when I'm talking with clients. So publicly I use inclusive terminology, but when I'm in a prenatal with something, or if I'm like, you're doing a good job, mama, keep working at it, because I know how they identify. And so you can still be with woman when you're with women.
Right.
Like, it doesn't have to be totally split, like you can't ever use these words at all. You just have to know your audience. I agree.
And I think the real tricky part to this, and I'll kind of touch on this person's question right here, is the internet. The internet is so pervasive, it's so large, it's so huge. You're never gonna be able to make everyone happy, even if you're just gonna go and make a post and say my favorite color is blue. Someone in the comments is gonna be like, well, you're stupid because the color blue represents sadness, and I can't believe like you can say literally anything, and there's gonna be somebody who's like, you're stupid. And I think that the internet is so big that when we're trying to make these adjustments, it can be tricky, because like I interchange my language throughout my post. And so if you happen to click on this post, you're going to see me use the word mother a whole bajillion times. And if you happen to be that person who's like, I don't feel included, then that post would make you feel, really not included. But I think it is so true that the birthing space is becoming very, very like, woman, female, like I'm a sacred energy goddess and like women should run the world. Like that energy is very, I think, popular in the birth community, and I'm not against it. I think like there are certain times where women need that, but then I think there are certain times where it does kind of work against us, and men are kind of being edged out a little bit. and I know because I've kind of talked to dads who have said like, oh yeah, the previous time our child was born, you know, she had the doula and the this and the that, and I just kind of felt like I was off to the side. I kind of just felt like I wasn't really needed. And I think we're going to have to be really careful because we want the dads, right? We want the dads to be a part of it and to grow and evolve with us. And if we get stuck in this, like, everything is about, you know, wombs and boobs and like womanness, that doesn't really leave any space for them. And I think we kind of are like gonna have to rediscover what that looks like for men to be in that space, in their sacredness too. So
yeah, definitely. And you know, if that's where you draw your power from, if you're like, I am a freaking birthing goddess and I'm all about my womb energy and I'm so powerful, like, fan freaking tastic, like, draw your strength where you feel most sacred and most powerful. But you know, where it just gets tricky is if then you push that on other people, right? Like, I mean, that comes into play with all kinds of beliefs, whether it's political or religious or whatever. It's like, I find a lot of strength from my femininity and my being a woman and whatever. But I'm never going to be like, hey, you over there, like, you also need to find the same strength that I do. And you need to call yourself this and you need to call your family this. Like, that's just so silly. So you do you, boo, right?
Right, exactly. So I wanted to move on to a big topic again that I see with the birth plans. And now I'm seeing a lot of this with providers. A lot of providers kind of saying, you know, don't get too invested into your birth plan. Do you feel like birth planning can kind of lead to a sense of disappointment sometimes for some people? And like, how can people mitigate that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that is one of the big critiques of birth plans, is that they can be really rigid. And so when you have that rigid thinking, and as we all know, birth is a completely unknowable and unplannable process, that can lead to trauma, that can lead to disappointment. And so, you know, one of the ways that I was trying to cope with that on Motherboard is just that they can make different versions of their birth plan. They can make different versions of their motherboard. So you can create a vaginal and a cesarean one. And we have lots of like family center cesarean topics that they could choose from. You could also make like a medicated versus unmedicated one. You could make an induction one. So you want to just have people really embrace that resilience and that flexibility, that like, okay, I really don't want an induction. That sounds awful. But if I'm confronted with that, here are some of the ways that I can cope. Here are some of the things that I can ask for, so that we can still build that resilience, and so they don't get so stuck and become traumatized.
Yeah, so basically you guys have the ability where you can make multiple birth plans, not just one. I think that's great. Like, to reiterate, making more than one plan, I think is the best plan. And then a lot of people don't think about, what am I going to do in this type of situation, until they're in that situation, like with the induction. You know, you get up to the 41 and then you're like 41 and 3, 41 and 4, and it's like, okay, you know, am I the person that's gonna chug the castor oil and go get the acupuncture, or am I just gonna go ahead and get the induction? And then what types of things do I want? And all of these things, you know, when you wait till the very end to think about them, it's so much harder to weigh those pros and cons when it's boom right there in your face. And I think a lot of people they get pressured into things that they didn't really think about. So they didn't know, okay, if I would have taken the time to look into inductions, I would have known that I don't really need to be induced until this many weeks, not at 39 weeks. And, you know, you end up making these decisions and you're looking back like, oh, darn, if I had only thought about that a little bit more, I could have made a different decision.
Well, and I think something that we really fail parents at and really gloss over as childbirth educators and birth workers and doulas is that, I mean, like a hospital-based childbirth class, I'm just drawing generalizations, not all of them, but like a lot of times they're like, this is what you can expect to happen to you during your birth. They don't really talk about choice. They don't really talk about making informed decisions. But on the other hand, you know, as doulas and childbirth educators, sometimes we're like, you have all of these lovely options spread out at your feet. And the thing is that like choice is an illusion for a lot of people based on your geographic location, the color of your skin, the insurance that you have, and how that limits your care providers, and just, you know, how your care provider reacts to you, you know. So you might say like, yes, you can choose to not be induced at 39 weeks, but then if they're like, well, that's fine, but your baby's gonna die, like,
Right.
that doesn't seem like a choice. That doesn't seem like a choice. Yeah. And so that's my next horizon. So like the web-based application is really great for parents during the prenatal period, but I'm like, fantastic, how do we bring this to everybody who walks in the door, whether or not they have a doula or took a class or anything? Like, how do we give this information to them in that moment? And so we're working on a prototype for a tool we're calling I Decide, which is a click-through informed choice module that care providers can use at the bedside. So say you come into the clinic and you're like, you've got